Hello, and today we're going to play around with some HUDs and user interfaces. So, first of all, what we're going to do is create a basic HUD. We do that by right-clicking down the bottom here, going to user interface, and then going to the widget blueprint, just like so. And we're going to give this a name, and we can call this player main HUD. When we launch this, what will then happen is we'll get a screen which we can then change the resolute size of, depending of course what you want your game to look like. And now we could play around with a lot of the actual data within here, but for now we're just going to do some of the basics, and we're going to do that by getting the player's name to appear on the actual user interface. So we do that by grabbing a text box, then dragging and dropping it into the game screen itself. We can resize it accordingly. There's lots to play around with here if you need to do specific alignment. There's also something called an anchor point, which is very useful, which determines where the actual screen's being drawn from in terms of the actual engine. So perhaps keeping them all to the same of the top right hand side will just make it so we don't end up with any user interfaces being dragged around the world. Then finally play around with perhaps the color, the text, how we want it to appear in that lovely salmony color, maybe even change the font and the actual size. So now we have the basics of what we want it to make it look like. We have to now get some data to it. Now we could easily just type into this like so, and we can then see what actually happens. So at this moment in time, I've just set the name to being Dave, like so, and now I'm going to have to add some code in to the player just to make sure the HUD actually appears. We do that by going to the main player, and we'll use that event begin play just here, and then we will go create widget, select the widget class, which is of course the player main HUD, and then just add the line which says add viewport at the very end. Now, if we compile this and we go to run it, just check the HUD's auto setup, that's fantastic. We'll have the name Dave appear in the top corner, but we don't want that. What we want to do is we want to instead call some data from somewhere else in the game. So what we might want to do is we had our structure from earlier which had the name default set to Bob. Now, what we could do is add that data into it. So if we go back to our HUD widget, we then have a little button here next to the text which says bind. We click on that and then create a binding. What we can do is start adding in some data here to go directly into that text box. We can do that by clicking the variable button, add a name called info struct, like so, then calling main structure again, drag that in, get it, break off the data, and set the name. It'll convert it from a string to text, compile, and now remember our main structure was called Bob, not Dave, so when we start playing we're now called Bob. And that's how you basically create a very basic heads up display.